All right, ladies and gentlemen, Unit 3, the third part. Just making sure the camera's working. Looks like it's working. We are on the top of page 4. We're going to go from page 4 through the middle of page 5 and talk about developments of society, and then also add in a couple of wars down the end of the 18th century here, and then we'll be on to the French Revolution before you know it. Okay, here we go. Some of the changes to the society as a result of the emerging early modern European period. We're talking about marriage and family. For the most part, wealthy people continued to make marriage decisions based on the fact that marriage was about wealth and property and status and rank. This led to marriages being not yet motivated by love, more motivated by economics and by the status of your family and who you're going to marry. We do see on the other side of the equation, among the less privileged within the society, there's a movement towards marriage perhaps a little bit later in life as people start to live a little bit longer. You're having to wait to serve apprenticeships, or perhaps even having to wait for someone to pass away in order to inherit land. And both of those trends are going to make for a little more waiting time on that side. Reading material. My intellectual types are probably reading university type materials or Enlightenment documents and treatises. My lower class folk are reading. There's a lot of literacy, especially in Western Europe, more than you'd expect. But for the most part, we're not reading the same things as wealthy people. We're reading things that would be much more common. These are chapbooks or perhaps hero stories, rags to riches type ideas, maybe some crude satire thrown in there for fun. Diet and food. Well, if you're rich, you're eating well. There's a real variety to be had of meats and cheeses and perhaps even vegetables and fruit and sweets. On the other side of it, if you're an average person, then your daily diet would be very repetitive. You're going to eat not very much variety, but it's going to be a lot of beans and a lot of grains, nothing really in the meat department, except for very rarely perhaps. No sweets. Dairy would have been rare as well. If we look at the socialization things, we got people leaving. Hey, how's it going? Adios. See you guys. If you look on the socialization side of things, it would have been very common for both sides of the society to go out to carnivals and to fairs and things of that nature, but the elites tended to focus as well around their salons and around their drawing rooms. There's a real love of violence and alcohol that we're going to see in the lower classes, as society is made up of people who really like to have a good time and go crazy out in the outdoors. Availability of consumer goods. Among the wealthy, yeah. Furniture, books, tableware, new flatware, tablecloths, things like that. Things that show a little bit of status. I've got a clock in my house, or I have a mirror, I have some pictures. Those sorts of things would have been common among the upper classes, not going to be very common at all among the lower classes. Religious tolerance. The increasing amount of religious tolerance due to Enlightenment thinking among the elites, and less religious warfare generally among the lower classes. Work options. Someone who's born into the nobility or into the elite is going to have a nice road ahead of them. A career perhaps in handling the family business or in the military, in the priesthood, something that would have been laid down fairly nicely. If you're someone on the other side of the equation in the lower classes, it's just really manual labor, I beg your pardon. Even when the cottage industry comes around, it's not the sort of experience where you're getting a lot of time to do things that would have been more exciting. Increases in banking and finance. You begin to see the movement here towards larger central banking, particularly in a country like England, and the English are going to use that advantage in order to become more and more powerful within Europe. Transitioning to the 5th page. Two big wars in the middle of the 18th century, which are balance of power wars. In the first war, the War of the Austrian Succession, Frederick the Great of Prussia invaded Maria Theresa's Austria in order to seize the territory of Silesia. When he did this, Frederick had disobeyed a promise that he had given to Leopold II, Maria's father, that there would be no wars following Leopold's death and the controversial rise to power of a woman to the throne of Austria. But Frederick is clear. He wants more territory for his growing Prussian state. And when the alliances of the war follow similar patterns to what we've seen in the past, the Austrians against the French and the French against the English, that sets us up for an Austria-England versus France-Prussia matchup. Now, at the end of the War of the Austrian Succession in 1748, there isn't a return of Silesia. That's a sign to us that there's probably going to be another war. That other war breaks out in 1756 in Europe, called the 7 Years' War. In America, the fighting had started slightly early in 1754 as a part of what in American history we call the French and Indian War. Now, the big moment, though, for this war happens prior to the war taking place. The fear of a rising Prussia motivates the French and the Austrians to put aside their more sacred, ancient rivalry in order to team up with each other and try and balance this rise of Prussia. The Russians as well are worried about Frederick the Great and his rising Prussian state. That rhymed. Frederick the Great and his rising Prussian state. Yeah! All right, back to normal. Just dropping bars, folks. But the alliances of the war shape up like this. The Prussians and the English against the French, the Austrians, and the Russians. Now, the English in this war are not necessarily for European land. They couldn't be bothered. But they are more interested in colonial lands. They particularly want the French colonial lands of the New World. When the dust settles and the war is over, it's England that really comes out as the major victor. The French, having lost, do not get any land in the New World. And in fact, the English pick up French claims to the massive territories of the central part of North America. The Great Lakes and the Mississippi River Valley all go over to the English column. That puts the English in a great position as a colonial empire. It marks another disappointing loss and a huge expense for the French, and it's going to hurtle them down the road towards this tragic revolution at the end of the 18th century. The Prussians take Silesia, a sign that they are Europe's new up-and-coming power. The Austrians lose it, in a sign that they may be on the decline. The Russians, having left the war midway through, we'll just leave them out of it for now. Next stop, La Révolution des Français. Au revoir.